Everybody knows about the use of entheogenic plants, fungi, and animals in Mesoamerica, and there's a whole plethora of videos that you can browse when looking for information on it. However, there's a very small pocket of videos that you can find talking about further north in the Americas. When we think of psychoactive plants, typically people think about cannabis, tobacco, psilocybin mushrooms, Amanita muscaria, peyote, and even DMT from toads or in other forms such as ayahuasca. Now, a lot of these plants and animals and fungi do occur in Mesoamerica, but what people don't know is that they actually used to have a much larger range. I bet you don't know this, but there used to be grizzly bears in California before people started destroying the land. Now, the land in the United States is pretty destroyed compared to what it used to be in its former glory. Mexico is a lot less developed and hence still has a lot of these natural medicines around. Here's a photo of a Paneola cyanescens that I found on top of the mountain, the Tortuga in Ayutla, Jalisco. However, I would be lying if I told you that I needed to travel this far south in order to find magic mushrooms. I found magic mushrooms in Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Washington, Oregon, and even in Montana in the form of Paneola cinctulus. Now, in Northern America, there's actually more potent mushrooms than you would find in the tropics. Generally, Psilocybe Cubensis is significantly weaker than Psilocybe Cyanescens or Azarescens, which can be found around the Astoria region of Oregon and Washington. Washington, being a temperate rainforest, is also known as the king and key area for most Psilocybe species, such as stunzii, allenii, and ovoids, which I have found actually all of them. Everyone knows about the use of entheogens and psychedelics in Mesoamerica. However, there's very little information online talking about use further than the Tropic of Cancer and what people were actually using in the current United States that we have today. Entheogenic use was really widespread across the entire continent, even all the way up in Alaska, so I'm going to be giving kind of a breakdown of all the different things that you could expect if you were to travel back in time and sit with these people through their rituals and shamanic expressions with these different plant medicines. Here's a photo of me in Nayarit holding a bag of Amanitas hesserai. I believe I'm pronouncing that correct, but Amanitas can be found as far south as Mexico, but they can also be found all the way in the northern parts of Alaska and even in the northern parts and northwest territories of Canada. They're also found in Siberia, and Siberian shamans from different tribal groups have taken this form of magic mushroom. Now, this is slightly different from psilocybin. Psilocybin is the responsible chemical for the psychoactive effects of different psilocybe species. However, this contains muscimol and ibotenic acid. Ibotenic acid, when converted with a little bit of heat or through someone's kidneys, or an animal such as a reindeer, can turn back into muscimol and then increase the psychoactive effects of the mushroom. Knowing that even in extremely frigid Arctic sub-zero conditions, Amanita muscaria can thrive, there are psychedelics that people can find in all parts of the world. Whether you live with coconuts or whether you live shivering next to a polar bear, there are psychedelic mushrooms and there are psychedelic plants available. On top of that, a large portion of the Southwest was covered in peyote, which is now endangered and vulnerable because of overpicking and its really long and arduous, laborious process to get it to flower and produce seeds. There is copious amounts of evidence that peyote has been used consistently for thousands of years by these natives who lived in regions where it was present as a form of connecting with their ancestors and animalistic spirits. They also used San Pedro and other sorts of cactuses that grow in these areas that also contain mescaline, the active ingredient in psychedelic cactuses. And you're just a hunter-gatherer and you're not paying attention to plants. Even they too can get high because accidentally you're stumbling around, you don't know the landscape very well, you're new to this biome, and you find a frog or a toad and you think you might be able to eat it. Oh, well, joke's on you, this toad produces one of the most strong forms of 5-MeO-DMT in the entire world, known as Cambo, and is one of the most powerful psychedelics that you can find, and it lives right here in the United States in Arizona. It's called the Sonoran cane toad. So there's really no way that people could have lived in the current day United States and not been taking psychedelics because they would have ran into the copious amount of psychedelics at some point through living in touch and communion with nature. There's also a ton of wild rhododendron species which live in the United States and the Pacific Northwest. This area in the rhododendrons, a lot of bees can collect the nectar and pollen and create a type of mix of the psychoactive ingredients known as mad honey. Now, I do know that honeybees did not exist in North America until the European honeybees were brought, but that also doesn't mean that Native Americans didn't know how to extract the psychoactive ingredients from the rhododendron. In other parts of the country, further south, around Texas and maybe Oklahoma, you have datura, and you have these, not necessarily that you'd want to take them, but they are deliriant, they're a very powerful hallucinogen, and there's, of course, morning glory, which grows wild all over the place, and the seeds contain lysergic acid amide, which is one step away from becoming lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. So you could chew on these seeds, or Hawaiian baby Woodrose seeds as well. There's plenty and plenty of psychedelics to be found in all different biomes and regions across North America, not just limited to Mesoamerica. Why we talk so little about this is probably because the people in North America weren't creating giant statues of people with mushrooms for head or psychedelic art as much as the well-preserved cultures of the Mayans and Aztecs, who built giant temples and, huge, beautiful, beautiful murals and all kinds of other things. And this was really because of agriculture. Now, Cahokia might have had some stuff that was similar to this, but there's a lot less concrete evidence of psychedelic-inspired art in North America, but we will take a look at some of the evidence that we do have. The latest evidence we have of pre-Columbian cultures using psychedelics is that when the Spanish came to the Southwest in the United States of America, not Mexico, they had found peyote being used by the tribes there. Yes, at the time I believe that was part of Mexico, but I digress. They were finding that before Europeans had arrived, there is evidence that they were ceremonially using peyote for generations. It had been something that had been used for probably thousands of years, just from their historical documentation. As far as psilocybin goes, there's been some evidence in the form of pictographs found in the Southwest and different parts of California, Washington, and Oregon, where you can see they're very, very rare, but mushrooms have been documented in different pictographs on occasion. And these mushrooms that they usually draw superficially represent some of the native magic mushroom species that exist there. However, more compelling evidence would be the fact that they have found magic mushroom or psilocybe mushroom residue on different artifacts and ritualistic objects that they have dug out of different North American sites. There have also been a couple different instances of different pottery specimen being recorded that have magic mushrooms painted on them, but those again are also very rare. It seems that Mesoamerican culture was much more deeply connected with a magic mushroom use than more Northern American tribes. Now, they did use a significant amount more of peyote, but magic mushroom use was something that was traditional and ceremonial, but the mushroom wasn't so deified as it was in Mesoamerica, building large statues of mushrooms or adding it into huge murals or different parts of temples. Keep in mind that the difference in evidence is not because there's a lack of possibility or probability that they were using psychedelics across the United States, but rather that the civilizations that existed in Mesoamerica had record keeping and they had much more permanent art that they could create to represent their use. I also want to mention that most of the groups in North America were kind of hunter-gatherers stuck in anything but Neolithic. Even if they were Mesolithic or Paleolithic, they were still living a much more hunter-gatherer lifestyle. A lot of their art probably would have been pigments and dyes of mushrooms that would have washed away years ago. And I have seen personally myself, I had photos, lost the USB drive, but I have seen something called a sunstone, which is a stone that they carved intricate designs in out in the desert, in the Sonoran and Chihuahua desert, which I would hike around in. Now, these stones, I remember somebody was pointing out to me how one of them looked like a mushroom had been carved into it, because the whole thing looked just like a mushroom. That could have been interpreted as some use of psychedelics, but there's no definitive concrete evidence other than the remains of some residues of psilocybin mushrooms being found in different ritualistic objects. Other than that, mushroom use was used globally, pretty much across the entire planet, so it would be very strange if just the northern part of North America did not use mushrooms. Something that people don't know, because they hear that land races of different cannabis species exist in Mesoamerica, like, for example, Acapulco gold. Cannabis is actually not from the Americas. They are American land races because they were introduced there nearly half of a millennia ago when the Spanish first entered Mexico. However, they have evolved separately on their own and formed their own land race. Originally, they are still from the Old World. So they really did not have access to marijuana until the Spanish came and introduced it. But once it was introduced, marijuana use was widespread, and there is documentation of it being used by the Sioux Indians and many other different tribes to achieve some sort of trance-like state. Now, we do know that Native Americans in the past and today have built something called a sweat lodge. And a sweat lodge is where you sit inside of a very hot environment where steam is thrown on top of coals to create kind of a sauna effect. Now, this heat can do different things to your body and put you into like a dream-like trance state. This state is comparable to show that these people understood what a trance was. They made music that would put them in a trance state. They would wear garments and clothing and masks and things to entertain people in trance states or tell stories or do other things like this. And so there is evidence that they do consider the trance state to be sacred. They continue to this day to represent that. And in this current moment, they are using peyote and magic mushrooms in all different tribes currently in the United States. So they have a really deep connection with these entheogenic substances and seeing them as gifts from nature and gifts from God himself. So the usage of psychedelic substances in the past compared to today is probably very similar. The sweat lodge being an example, they enter into the sweat lodge to purify themselves or to go on different spiritual journeys. There's also vision quests where people leave and they go off in search of wisdom and enlightenment. And when you're young, you're sent out sometimes to go walk in the wilderness by yourself as a form of passage. And when you return, you'll return as a man. Now, imagine that you're 12 and you're in a native tribe, and they say, hey, go walk around over there for like a couple days and like try to live on your own and stuff, and then come back, and then you'll be a man. That doesn't seem, and I could be wrong, but that doesn't seem like what they would actually designate a transformative experience. I'm certain that psychedelics or entheogenic plants or mushrooms were somehow used in that process, where they would go out and search out in the woods for one of these entheogenic substances, go on this experience and this trip connecting with their ancestors, and when they did, they would be able to return with a new perspective and be a new man. And then this was when they could enter the tribe as a man, which was seen as a very sacred thing. More evidence of use of psychoactive plants in North America is the Zuni and the Navajo tribes, which would be in relatively the Arizona southwest area, had used the Jimson weed or datura plant seeds, which contain scopolamine and atropine, as different deliriants to enter into this sort of trance-like state, again, into the psychedelic world. There's also some lesser psychoactive plants such as Artemisia californica, Douglasiana. I don't believe Artemisia vulgaris is present natively in North America. However, there's a mugwort, that's the name of the plant, species that grows across most of the United States, and it was called dream plant by the natives who lived here because it was used to induce vivid dreams. Now, it works because it has a chemical in it called thujone, which is also present in Thuja plicata, or also known as the western red cedar. Now, thujone is a GABA A receptor agonist, if I'm correct, so it has a very similar effect to alcohol. So the interesting thing about thujone and mugwort is that GABA actually can affect the vividness of dreams and affect REM cycles. So this plant could have been considered a psychedelic or psychoactive plant at the very least that was used by natives to induce a different state or a different feeling that they would be able to commune or do for ritual purposes. In the southeastern part of the United States, the Choctaw, Creek, and Cherokee Indians, all of these different tribes, but mostly in the southeast, they would use morning glory seed, which we talked about contains LSA, which is a precursor to LSD. So they would be getting high and using the psychedelic from the seeds of the morning glory plant, which could be found growing around that region at that time. So this video is kind of just a short rundown of that psychedelics were indeed used, and there is tons of evidence to show that different plants were used. They may not be as mainstream as, big fat Cubensis mushrooms growing out of cow dung that you might find somewhere in the Aztec Empire. People were using things like LSA, precursor to LSD, psilocybin mushrooms that grow on wood that you might not even recognize, or peyote, for example, which can induce very strong visuals. So this is just evidence of that. And I also want to mention that the Native Americans, what they were using it for was likely for animism, which is the belief that every animal or being or river or type of, large rock or mountain or trees have a certain spirit to them. And when you take psychedelics, the perception of your own ego and the separation between yourself and other things kind of diminishes. This being the case, when you take psychedelics, you may come to the conclusion of like a epiphany towards, wow, this animism is something I can now feel that's tangible. This has loosened the barrier between the spirit world and the earthly world as far as how Native Americans' religion and spirituality goes towards seeing the world. So they may take substances and then be able to have a better connection to the river spirit or the mountain spirit or the mushroom spirit, for example. Of course, that's going to require an entire video on its own just to even scratch the surface of what shamanism or animism is for Native American tribes. But as far as concluding that, yes, this video is just something that you can send to people if they deny that people use psychedelics, I'll have sources and evidence linked in the description below. Thanks for watching.